Year 11, and here are the answers to the revision quiz from last week. So you were asked to match each character to their first names, and here we go. We've got Mr. Burling, he's Arthur, Mrs. Burling is Sybil, Miss Burling is Sheila, we've got Mr. Croft is Gerald, we've got Mr. Burling Jr. is Eric, and of course Miss Smith there at bottom is Eva. On this slide we were asked to look at the predictions made by Mr. Burling, and which were the ones that he actually made, and which were the ones that were little red herrings that I put in there for you. So let's just have a look at those answers. So there we are. Clearly he did not predict that England would win in the 1966 World Cup, and he didn't predict by 1960 there'll be no war and no strikes, and neither did he say the Japanese will never be involved in fighting. And so the next one was a little bit of revision about when the play was written and when the play was set. And well done if you got A. So the play was set in 1912 and it was written in 1945. And then just to get things in context, what was going on during that time? When was World War I and when was World War II? So your answers were A, B or C. Well done if you put C for World War I, 1914 to 1918, and World War II is A, 1939 to 45. And then we had to match the predictions to how we know that predictions Mr. Burling made were wrong. Okay, let's have a look at those answers, see how you got on. So we've got Germans don't want war. Well, we know that soon afterwards World War I followed. The Titanic is unsinkable. Well, we know that not to be true because we do know that it sank. We've got by 1940 there'll be no wars or strikes. Well, we know this not to be true because in 1940 we were at war again. Russia will always be behind. Well, Russia went on to be a very, very developed country after 1912. And we've got George Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells will be rubbish. Well, technically they're the most respected playwrights. And then you're marrying at a good time. Well, unfortunately, lots of bad things were to follow. Well done if you got those right. Now we had to look at which characters were being described by the stage directions here. So let's see how we got on. So, heavy looking, fairly easy manners, rather provincial in his speech. Well done if you got Mr. Arthur Burling. A cold woman, social superior was Mrs. Sybil Burling. A pretty girl, very pleased with life and rather excited was Sheila. And Gerald, of course, was described as an attractive chap, dandy, but a man about town. And then Eric is not at ease, half shy and half assertive. And then we have the inspector at the bottom there, who's described as purposeful and habits of looking hard at people. So then we had to decide how each character had contributed to Eva's death. So Sheila, she got her sacked from her job at Millwards because she was jealous. Sybil wouldn't give her any money from her charity or assistance. Gerald had an affair and then left her. Arthur initially sacked her from her job for asking for a pay increase, and Eric got her pregnant and stole some money. So which order did the characters get involved with Eva? Let's see how we did. And of course it was C. Arthur, Sheila, Gerald and Eric, and finally Sybil. Now what was the other name that Eva Smith was known by, and who knew her by this name? Well, of course her name was also Daisy Renton, and Gerald and the inspector knew her by this name. Now we needed to match the quotes to the character who said them, so let's just have a look at how we've got on. So Sheila, except for all last summer, regarding when Gerald didn't come near her. Then we've got Gerald, nearly any man would have done. got Eric there, because you're not the kind of father who he could open up to. And then we've got Arthur, hard-headed practical businessman. Sybil says you'll have to get used to that. And of course the inspector mentions we're all members of one body with his socialist outlook. So who said these quotes? To who or about who, and what does it show about their character? Well, the first one, I wish you hadn't told me, was said by Sheila, and she said it's the inspector, and it maybe shows that she's a tad on the selfish side. So Gerald says, all right, I knew her, let's leave it at that. And he says that to Sheila, and he thinks he can be a bit sneaky there, and that he can hide the fact that he had an affair with Eva from Sheila. And then Eric says, I don't know really, suddenly I just felt I had to laugh, and he says it to Sheila. Maybe it's a sign that he's quite a nervous character, he's not quite at ease, and he's got something to hide there. Perhaps he knows the question is coming and he's guessed that he's next because he knew Eva. And Arthur says, we've been had, that's all, and says that to Sheila. And it just shows that he's not learned anything by the end of the play, as indeed the older generation are shown not to have learnt anything, whereas the younger generation seem to have learnt the lesson. Now Sybil says, go and look for the father of the child, it's his responsibility, and she says that to the inspector, and she's trying to find somebody else to blame there, so she doesn't take the blame. And then the inspector finally says, your daughter isn't living on the moon, she's here in Brumley too, and he says that to Burling, and that he thinks Burling patronises Sheila a little bit. And of course we know that Mr and Mrs Burling do tend to treat Sheila and Eric as though they are young children. And finally, on this last slide, you have to try and think of two quotes to support these statements. So the first statement then we've got, Mr Burling cares more about money than people. I mean, among others, you could have had lower costs, higher prices, it's my duty to keep labour costs down. And then the second one, Mrs Burling won't accept any responsibility. But she tries to blame the young man who was the father of the child. She says, I blame the young man who was the father of the child. I don't believe it. I won't believe it. And then Sheila changes and becomes more mature. Initially Sheila refers to her mum and dad as mummy and daddy, and then later on she realises it was anything but a joke. Now Eric does drink too much at the beginning of the play, and we've got in stage directions that he suddenly guffaws, and even his own sister refers to him and says to him, you're squiffy. And then Joel expects Sheila to forgive him. Well, Cheryl says to Sheila, everything's all right now, Sheila. And he also says, what about this ring? I think he can keep hoping. And the last one then, the inspector's not intimidated by the family. And you could have had public men have responsibilities as well as privileges. You could have had be quiet for a moment and listen to me, among others. So well done if you got your quotes down for that final activity.